Big changes are on the horizon for landlords when it comes to EPC rules. And if you're a landlord, letting agent, or property business, you need to understand what's coming. The government launched a 12-week consultation on Friday, the 7th of February, about their proposals to require landlords to improve their properties to meet a higher energy efficiency standard, to an EPC C standard. We've heard a lot of commentary in the media about this, but nobody has really been exploring that it's a bit more complicated than this, because the government is proposing to overhaul the way that EPCs are assessed with new metrics. Now, if you're a landlord, you'll know how unreliable the current system is, and it can vary from assessor to assessor and even on the same property. But these changes are big, and we need to understand them. So the government has published a 67-page consultation document, and there it is. And in this video, I break it down and explain exactly what the government is proposing. And I share some thoughts about what landlords can do now. But stick around to the end, because I also give some tips about getting new EPCs before the rules come into effect. I'm Suzanne Smith, lawyer turned landlord, and I run the independent.com website and this YouTube channel, where I give practical, well-researched guidance for landlords and other property businesses without all the clickbait nonsense. You can find the blog version of this YouTube video at theindependentlandlord.com/new-EPC-rules. Right, let's get started. First of all, what's the government actually proposing? Well, the government is proposing to increase the minimum energy efficiency standards, and that's often called MEES, in the private rented sector to an EPC C. However, it's not the EPC C as we currently know it. If the proposals go ahead, the key changes will be, first of all, a new assessment method from 2026, which isn't that far away. And EPCs would no longer be based solely on energy running costs, but there will be new metrics which involve the building's fabric, its heating and water systems, and smart readiness, which I'll get onto in a bit. Number two, there's going to be a phased rollout. From 2028, all new tenancies must comply, and from 2030, this will apply to all rental properties. But given that the Renters' Rights Bill will end fixed-term tenancies, it means that all tenancies might have to comply with the new system if the rules don't change at any time with 2 months' notice, because tenants will be able to serve a notice to quit with 2 months' notice at any time once the bill comes into effect. This means we'll need to be ready for 2028 in case a tenant decides to leave. And next, there'll be stronger enforcement, because penalties could increase to £30,000 per property per breach. So if you have a rental property that currently has an EPC rating of D or E, then these changes could mean a lot of costly upgrades for you in the future. And because the system is changing, even properties that have an EPC C rating now might not necessarily have that same EPC C rating in the future, but there will be transition arrangements, and I'll get onto that in a bit. One big disclaimer as I go through it is that these rules are just at the consultation stage. They're not set in stone. And also, I'm not an energy efficiency assessor. I'm just doing my best to help us all understand the rules by going through them step by step. Number two, how will the new EPC be assessed? Well, currently, EPC ratings are based on the energy efficiency rating, that's abbreviated to EER, which looks at the estimated cost of heating, lighting, and hot water. But the government is proposing to change this. Under the new proposals, property will be assessed using 3 key metrics. The first one is fabric performance. This means how the building retains heat, taking into account insulation, whether the windows are double glazed or triple glazed, and draft proofing. Number 2 is the heating system efficiency. This will be the performance of heating and hot water systems, and low carbon options like heat pumps will be prioritized, which they're not now under the cost system. And number 3, smart readiness, where the property can use energy efficiently through smart meters, battery storage, and flexible energy use. Let's take the example of a poorly insulated home with a gas boiler. Now, at the moment, that might do well because it's based on costs. And if that's an efficient gas boiler, then that will do well. But in the future, that will change because if you've got a well insulated property with a heat pump, that will do better, even though gas is currently cheaper than electricity. So that will all change when the new rules come into effect. And the goal is to move towards a long-term energy efficiency rather than just short-term running costs. And I think that makes sense if we're looking to encourage people to go low carbon. And let's hope that the new system is more reliable than the current one, where assessments can vary widely from assessor to assessor, depending on the assumptions they make. And I've even seen on one of the properties I bought that I've had 3 very, very different assessments based on whether the assessor got the ladder out and went up to see how much was insulation was exactly in the loft. Let's now move on to the new cost cap for landlords. At the moment, the cost cap is 3,500 for landlords, so they don't have to spend more than that in getting their property to an EPC E. But the new one now is higher, and the government is proposing a £15,000 cost cap per property, meaning that landlords won't be required to spend more than this amount on improvements. And the government estimates that the average upgrade cost per property is 6,100 to 6,800, according to their modelling. Now, I think that that is massively underestimated based on my own experiences, and I'll get onto that in a minute. Now, they're also discussing an affordability exemption. That's a lower cap of £10,000 for some landlords, but we don't know that. And in any event, £10,000 is a lot of money if the house is only worth 80,000 or 100,000. So the government hasn't actually addressed that big problem. Number 4, how much does it actually cost to carry out these energy efficiency improvements? Well, it's difficult to say because it depends on so many factors, including what type of property it is, where you're starting from. But, a waffly answer like that is no good for you. So instead, I'm sharing what it cost me recently to upgrade one of my late Victorian houses from an EPC E to an EPC C. The previous owner had already replaced the old immersion tank style boiler with an efficient combi boiler, and they changed all the radiator valves. So my costs don't include that. So I'll go through them now. I increased the loft insulation to 300 millimeters, and it was quite a bit of work for somebody to do it. And the total cost was £800. The house already had some double glazing, but I spent £7,400 on double glazing in 2022 and 2023 on a total of 9 windows. And some of those were really big windows, particularly in the bay windows where one window in effect was 4. The suspended floor insulation for the cellar, the insulation itself cost £150, but the work done to take down the old cellar and replace it was £3,200. And so that all came to £10,650, excluding the boiler. And that was a couple of years ago. I know that maybe it cost me a little bit more to get things done because I'm in the expensive south, and it might be a bit cheaper for you where you are in your part of the country. But it shows it's a lot more than £6,000. And I didn't even replace the boiler. And to have done that, it probably would have cost £4,000, depending on the amount of work involved to take out the old system. Number 5, what happens if your EPC is already a C, B, or an A? So if your property already has a good EPC rating of C or above, you won't need to do anything until your EPC expires, because under the transition arrangements, you'll be considered as being compliant with the new system with your old certificate. However, If it drops below the new standard under the revised EPC system after 2026, you'll need to make upgrades. If your property is an EPC D or E, then if you're going to be doing any work after 2026, you'll need to get a new EPC in 2026 that has the new methodology before you make improvements, so you know that you're working from the right information. Number 6, what should landlords do now? Now, please note my disclaimer, but if you already have an EPC C, it might be worth getting a new one issued so you benefit from more of the 10-year exemption under the new system. And if you've done work and say it's a high D, it might make sense for you to go and get a new rating now, get it assessed to see if you are already an EPCC. And then that means you'll be able to benefit from the transition arrangements. And you might, if you're really close, you might decide to make a few improvements now just to get to an EPCC. But do bear in mind that if you do that, you won't be able to include the cost of those improvements in the cost cap should you not get an EPCC, and if you do those improvements before 2026. And now a few practical tips if you're thinking of getting a new EPC done, and these are based on my own personal experience. This is really important. Don't delegate it and supervise it yourself. I mean, what I did is I spoke to the assessor beforehand and asked what proof he needed to be able to reflect the work I'd done to the cellar, putting in the insulation and redoing it. So that would be reflected in the EPC assessment. And he said I needed to contact the builder and get full details on a letter with what they put in, which was 150 mil Rockwell. So it's really important that you make sure that you have the documentation to prove what work you've done if that work isn't visible. So that's the first thing. Make sure you check that they have a ladder and that they're going to go into the loft. Because what happened with one of mine, I noticed a property that I bought, the previous EPC had been done and it had assumed no insulation in the loft, when in fact there was 10 centimeters. So make sure that they go into the loft and supervise it, which is exactly what I did, as you can see here. And it's important to be there when they do the assessment so that you can answer questions, because I had quite a lot of questions from the assessor. And this isn't something to trust somebody who doesn't know anything about the house. And so because this is so key, and a incorrect assessment might stop you from running your business as a landlord, it's really important to give it the attention that it deserves. So these new proposals from the government will make energy efficiency compliance a lot more complicated for landlords. And we don't yet know how it will work in practice. And the rules aren't actually set in stone at the moment because it's out to consultation. But it's important that we all at least understand the way things are going. And so we can make decisions about whether we renew our EPCs now or not. And you can find a lot more information on this in my blog post that's on the independentlandlord.com/new-EPC-rules. And I'll keep that updated. And here's a playlist for landlord updates and another one for the latest on the Renters' Rights Bill. And if you found this useful, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps. And you can sign up for my free weekly newsletter at the independentlandlord.com/subscribed, and you'll get reliable, well-researched guidance straight to your inbox every Friday. See you soon.